All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rick Bostain. I'm chairman of a group called the Hydronic Industry Alliance Commercial. We are under RPA and IAPMO, a group of manufacturers that got together to address HVAC and water in commercial buildings primarily. And we started this group back in 2008 and realized that people needed software to be able to identify what's happening in an entire system in their building, and that to do that required a lot of money and a lot of energy studies. So we produced some software that I'll talk about later that is not only free to all of you in this room, but is also focused on what does it cost to do this stuff that we call energy efficiency. I'm going to try to cover a little bit of history, some background, and then I'm going to discuss some things that are being done on a scale that maybe you can't relate to personally, but I'm hoping that contrary to a lot of presentations, that when you leave today you will think, you know, I can do something. I could do this. How many of you, by a show of hands, actually have made a decision about the HVAC equipment in the building that you live in? Well, we're at an HVAC convention, aren't we? We have a few liars out there. How many of you decided what's in where the HVAC system that's in the building that you work in? And we have some of those as well. So we've got a knowledgeable crowd. And what I'm hoping to do is give you some information that you can take to the people that really look at HVAC as something that's a really great deal. It's not one of the highest bills that they have to pay monthly. And it's certainly not mine, because I've lived in a geothermal home for 30 years. I also have natural gas backup, so I'm resilient. Because when I moved to the area, the electrical service was very bad. But my HVAC bill is lower than my television bill, my phone bill, my internet bill. All of those things are higher. So much more difficult to manage even a home's budget today than when I first got into this business in the 70s. So we're going to talk about what's being done, and we're going to try to relate it to what you can do individually, and most of you will be experts in your circle of influence. So for some definitions, you'll hear me say local up. What I mean by local up is decisions being made locally based on what's available locally. We have two countries represented here in Canada and the United States. There's different issues in different places, and of course, we have, every city has some different regulations as well. But what I'm looking at is a coalition where owners work with the city and work with the utility to say, this is what we need. Here's an opportunity. How do we get this? We're going to talk about what you can do inside your own building to net the energy when you move from just talking about HVAC, but HVAC and water. You'll hear me say, plumbers and mechanics unite, because there's energy transfer that's available that way. And then I'll get into thermal energy networks. And who has heard about thermal energy networks? You can't raise your hand. You can't either. You can't either. She can't either. Okay, none of you that raise your hand can raise your hand. So I'm really excited that I explain what a thermal energy network is. Really quickly, think about it. You know what district heating is, you know what district cooling is. The thermal energy network is like district system, but the water is like geothermal temperature water, ground temperature water. What's the advantage? I told you I had an advantage because I had a geothermal home. What if I didn't have to buy my own groundwork? What if I didn't have to pay for that, but I could use that water to apply equipment in my building that typically you may not think about applying in a building that's under 100,000 square feet. The thousands of people that are down here talking about their equipment and what it can do are either going to say, we can operate really great against outside air, or if you had water that was this temperature, you can really save a lot of energy. So, this is my what slide? When you look at this, my comment is we've been electrifying in the United States since the 1970s. In the last 20 years, you can see that those lines that are horizontal and pretty colors are showing that industrially, residentially, and commercially, the use of natural gas in the United States is flat. Where the use of natural gas is not flat is by the power companies. I don't care about that. What I care about is what can we do to make our own situation better, and that's what we're going to talk about. I mentioned district heating. Why did we do why is there district heating in the very beginning? So I wouldn't burn down my neighbor's house in order to keep my house heated. But what we're going to talk about here is we're going to look at the evolution of districts from what's called first generation to fifth. And fifth generation is exactly what I just described to you, is that with multiple owners of buildings, from residential to light commercial to a lot of other different opportunities, the key is I can have whatever I want and I can make it operate cheaper because I'm connected to water. Then the district advantage is how do I help those buildings share energy among themselves, and how can I incorporate other sources of energy. And as 2 weeks ago in a webinar, the University of Washington had a facility basically said, if we don't learn how to work with these lower temperature resources, we're going to be missing out. And if anybody's ever been to the University of Washington or watched them play football, you know that what's right next to the University of Washington? Lake Washington. What you probably don't know is running right through the middle of the campus is a city sewer district. The other thing that you have to understand, what I want you to understand, is I'm not trying to tell you how to do something. Because also at the University of Washington, it's a teaching hospital. So they may have a goal to get rid of steam, but they also understand that they still need it for certain things. And as one guy said, sometimes we just have to use what we have. And that's what we're going to talk about, what we have. And the biggest difference of this district that I'm talking about is that it's bidirectional. It's not what temperature of hot water I give you or what temperature of cold water I give you. It's that I give you water that you can both heat from it or you can reject heat to it. So the owners, and we have to be very conscious of that, and we have some owners in this room, resilience is critical. We all get judged about whether we heated and cooled well after we get judged about did we heat and cool. We have to do that part first. Climate change is throwing some curveballs at us, and we're going to talk about that because we live in an industry that likes to look at historical data. We look at an industry that likes to size things based on typical or part load or annual consumption, and we're moving out of that. What's happening at demand? How can I function at demand? You hear about global warming potential. Well, I just want to talk about water because the global warming potential of water is 0. Now, CO2 is 1. And you'll hear people say, oh, natural gas is 80 times worse than CO2. Okay, they're playing with this number for global warming potential. There are natural refrigerants. There was an entire presentation on it earlier today. You know, ammonia, using CO2 as a refrigerant. Propane, there's propane chillers down on the floor. All these things are opportunities that maybe not everybody can take advantage of. what we're looking for is how can we do something that people can take advantage of? Because the problem is the availability of what technology this industry put together being available to who? The homeowner or the small business owner, commercial business owner that needs a break instead of being beat upon. So when you say we're going to remove carbon, we're going to remove gas, there's some things you have to understand. Part of it is, my slide's a lot prettier than that one. Oh, anyway. Water temperature. Now most water source heat pumps can do 140 degree water. There's a big discussion about that before, that, well, a heat pump's nice, but it can't make hot enough water. My message to you is I don't care if it can make exactly the temperature of hot water that you want, at least make it hotter, okay? And then you hear way too many times that if you got a COP of 2, you're going to pay half the price. You're going to pay half the price if you were heating with electric heat, not half the price if you were heating with gas. And we aren't fooling any owners. They know. They know that they had, even at home, they had to fight through electric cooling all summer to get to that nice low winter bill. Now you're saying I'm going to have that bill year-round? So we've got work to do because there are things that we can do, and we have to, I'd say, figure out how to talk to the other part of the world, people that aren't in this business. It's nice that I can come talk to you, but all of you already know these things. So hopefully I can give you some ideas about how do we approach that so that there is this lower consumption strategy. And it basically comes down to one thing. I insulate my building from outside temperatures. I pick walls, insulation, and windows to do that. What this is about is insulating your HVAC system from outside air temperatures. The outside air temperature affects the load in the building and what's going on, but also if you have air source equipment, then it needs to function against the outside temperatures. And we'll talk more about that because we know that technology is changing, and it's changing a lot. But we're going to focus on how do we capture heat from cooling and offset what's going on with carbon. We have two issues. Global warming on one hand, or climate change, which is heating and cooling, and then we want to decarbonize. The problem with decarbonize is heating. Well, we have this extra heating. How do we put them together? And why I put this current slide up is to say we need to stop thinking that if you're going to buy a heat pump, that it looks like a mini split. That every piece of advertising, everything that shows up doesn't explain what a commercial water source heat pump or commercial water source chiller reversing unit, a complex air-cooled chiller can do. And some of it is because it's not relevant to an individual homeowner or a small business. I can't apply it. I think we can ask for it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Now, another thing I wanted to mention to you is that equipment that's up there, yeah, that's an easy picture for me to get because I work for a company that makes it. But what are you looking at? You're looking at a unit that could be in a room. You're looking at a unit that can do a whole house. You're looking at a unit that can be a VAV system connected to it. You're looking at a unit that can be a DOAS unit. You're looking at a unit that can just be a rooftop unit. You're looking at a unit where you can put enough heating and cooling in modular chillers through a 34-inch door to handle 300 tons of air conditioning. And what I'm advocating is we need to use all of these resources, including those that use air, in order to benefit who? The owner. Not up here talking about what we're going to do about decarbonization and electrification, let's move to what are we going to do for the owner, because we have a problem. We like to tell people what they can't do, because we can enforce what they can't do. When we make suggestions to say, why don't you do this, is where we sort of fall down. So can we make it easy? Can we make it a revenue-driven ideology? I mentioned Princeton earlier. I like this because Princeton has been on it has a campus logic, one owner. They're making their decisions because they have all these buildings together. And they did a study from 2012 to 2014, which is reflected a piece of it on that screen, and they realized what? That because of the mix of buildings that they have, they were doing simultaneous heating and cooling. Now they're very progressive, they love people. If you can listen to any webinars that they do, they want people to understand. We're not doing this because we're a rich institution, we've got a lot of money. We're doing this because we have to answer to stockholders, we have to answer to our board, we have to answer to the students, and we have to understand through actual practice what works and what doesn't work. But they say, look, if we have a bunch of wood that we have to burn up, and that offsets us buying something else, then that's a temporary solution. We don't rule out anything. They do know this, and this is my flip. I have just rotated the blue, which is the cooling part, up on top of the red, which is the heating part. So that you can see that over 3 years, that purple is where they were doing on that campus simultaneous heating and cooling for 3 years. That ended in 2014. Since 2016, they've been on the campaign. What does that mean for us? That means that maybe our individual building doesn't doesn't provide a solution, but does our neighborhood, does our neighbor. Can we move energy back and forth between them? And how do you move energy in a district? And water. There's no district duct solutions, there's no district refrigerant piping solutions, there's only district water solutions, unless you can talk steam. The other thing they understood was that by using geoexchange, by using thermal storage tanks, they were able to knock the peaks off. So when we talk about, hey, let's look at how can we benefit an owner and yet benefit everyone that's being served by that grid or by that power company. And then our ATMO is our administrative arm over us. And you say, well, what are they doing? And what we're doing is trying to help take that campus logic and move it to the community or the individual owner. So in UMC 2024, they created a chapter that covers what are called 5G networks, thermal, energy networks, ambient temperature loops. Here we go. We can't decide on what to call anything, so we call it everything. We get so many names that everybody thinks it's different. We should have called heat pumps reversing air conditioners, but air conditioners were already that thing you put in your building to cool it. So we caused problems by saying, well, this is a heat pump. Well, there's a lot, everything that has a compressor is a heat pump. It pumps heat from one place to another. Your refrigerator is a heat pump. Why does it last a long time? Because on one side it has a fixed amount of work that it's supposed to do. On the other side it lives in an environment that is friendly so that it uses less energy. The really neat thing about them is you can put them in your garage, you can put them on your porch, and they still work. Because one side is fixed. So this is about a district system, but how can it be applied to an individual building as well as a district? So the advantage to the owner, where we're headed, no CapEx for infrastructure. I get the advantage of having geothermal water, geothermal temperature water It doesn't have to come from geothermal boreholes. It's just water that's that temperature. How many of you have been involved in doing a boiler, cooling tower, water source heat pump system in a building? About a third of you. I've been doing it since the 70s. How does that work? Why does it work? Because it's easy. It's not a chiller plant that I have to deliver 42-degree chill water to every piece of equipment that's scattered out in the building. It's not a boiler where I got to decide, do I do 180 today, 160 tomorrow, 170? What? No. It's water that's, back in the early days, it will be between 60 and 90. It will not be lower than 60. It will not be higher than 90. And you used a boiler and a cooling tower to keep it in a 30-degree, 40-degree range. A lot easier to manage. When I first started selling water source heat pumps in buildings, it was because they were schools. There was state legislation that said you will only be allowed to have a 2-pipe system. That meant you're going to be heating, and then when the seasons change, which now they change frequently, you'll switch over. If you lived in a big city years ago, you knew that you had your central hot water or steam was on here and it switched over, you know, in May or June, and then in September it switched the other way and you went back and forth. Water source heat pump system circulates that water around the building, and then back in those days you had individual little packages that heated and cooled on demand. The advantage was that while one was cooling and one was heating, they netted each other out back at the mechanical room. They didn't have to net each other out inside a condensing unit. They netted each other out on the whole building. And that logic is still something we want to talk about, except the advantage today is, based on the slide I showed you previously, is you don't have to have a bunch of little bitty units all over the place. Now that same logic of operating for efficiency, a compressor in a controlled range can give you hot water, hot and cold water at the same time, can be a package unit to BAV, can be a package unit to DOAS, can be a package unit to sewer heat recovery, can be a package unit to your pond, whatever. All of those things are possible. The advantage is that for the owner, he didn't have to pay for infrastructure. What's rebates all about? Getting the owner to pay for infrastructure and then he gets some money back. We want to ask for another way. We want to ask for the ability to trade energy among buildings with a simple water loop. We want to ask for another series of pipes in the ground that allow us to do this. So when we ask, you are putting together your team, your neighbors, your neighborhood, your area that needs support, and says, look, here's what we can do. We can take that logic of long-term investment recovery that's being applied in every utility. In fact, a lot of gas utilities don't make any money on the gas that goes through. They are only set up to make their money on recovery from infrastructure. And if you think about what's going on outside almost every building that this would be suitable for, they already have hot water, or they already have water delivered that they're heating, or they have sewage connected. There's already 2 water systems at least going to those buildings. So when I talk about this system, I'm going to be heavily oriented toward, if we're going to add another infrastructure, then I want that infrastructure managed by the people that manage the sewer district. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, the sewer is a great place to recover energy, just ask people in Denver. But number 2 is the sewer district or the water jurisdiction having authority can go to their board and say, We're going to invest in infrastructure to use less power and less carbon. We're going to use less fossil fuels. And if I have gone to the gas company and said, you're saying you want us to, where we have to remove gas or where we don't have good gas service, to put in infrastructure to use less, I don't think we can sell that. So it's up to us. It's up to us as owners to say, look, we want this advantage. It's up to us to explain to city planners and even the sewer district itself is, look, here's a way for you to make money. And here's a way for an owner to say, guess what? Not only am I going to have an energy source, but it's managed by the sewer district, which also is going to have an eye on what's going on with my water quality. And if you think energy is a big issue, then go to Mississippi and talk to them about water. Not a pretty picture. So what can you do as an individual? And here's how we're going to try to help you. We have a software program. It's free. It allows you to model buildings, commercial buildings. Basically, you do a box model. Instead of having fixed temperatures, it has thin weather data. The one thing that you need to understand is we have oriented this program to reflect what it costs the owner. So if you say I want to compare on this office building in Chicago, and I'm going to do multiples. I'm going to do a school and a strip mall and an apartment and a house. Whether you put a rooftop on it or you put a central package, central plant system in, or you put VRF in with DOAS, or you use water source air conditioning of some kind, distributed to individual units or centralized to any other HVAC system you want. It's been done for decades. And what people that do geothermal, what people who buy their own infrastructure and pay for their own infrastructure know is the numbers on the left. You can talk about water source heat pumps, you can talk about the difference between water and air, and you can get these little numbers, little tiny percentages. But when you go into this program, and admittedly this one's run on Chicago, the people that embrace geothermal as a solution for their building understand that they may be saving 50 to 70% of the cost. What I'm advocating today is how do we get that to everyone where it's possible. I even have a solution for people that, like me, live kind of off by themselves and have their own sewer and their own septic tank and their own, except I'm connected to electricity and natural gas. Unfortunately, in Oklahoma, if I want to disconnect from natural gas, they're discussing me having to pay them $1,300 to remove gas. So I'm not pro one thing or the other. What I am is pro using every resource in a staged transition. The next thing that this best software does that's free to all of you today is it points out that because we use ASHRAE guidelines and thin weather data, and we wanted to do a demand calculation, that on the worst day in Chicago, the cooling demand for the systems is based on 91.4. And the heating is based on minus 1.5. And we know both of those aren't realistic numbers when it comes to the full range that we have to have equipment. The numbers that are lit up, though, are saying that if you do a ground source heat pump, you can cut those numbers in half. And if you look at heating, you might be able to cut that number by 75%. It all depends on what? Local up. And this software allows you to put in your locality and build it up. What I tell people about best software is if you have a consultant that you're dealing with, or a mechanical that you're dealing with, and he can't make look good in best, it's not. And best is free and best is fast, but it's a top level. Anybody can do it. My granddaughter can model a building in 15 seconds. She had a race between her my three grandsons, and she won the ice cream. It's that simple. So up here, you're going to see a repeat. This is a 74,000 square foot school, a 22,000 square foot strip mall, a 4-story apartment, and a 2,400 square foot home, and they all look the same way. If I had that geothermal water available to me to air condition my building, I would have the lowest operating cost by a big margin. Now, what if I didn't have to pay to put in that infrastructure? There is no ROI that I have to calculate because I don't have any capital expenditure for infrastructure. I now spend money inside my building and I ask for my rebates for my units. The owner of that infrastructure has all kinds of methods for financing and recovery, and that's why I like the water district, because they can send you a bill and they can go to their board and say, we're doing this to use less, and it makes sense. And as an owner in that district, now I have a voice in the water district that may be the city saying, wait a minute, we're not going to have this discussion about now you got to charge me more because you're using less. We'll have a voice together to watch what's happening with those costs. Because we're not ruling out that you can't have gas brought to your house and do outdoor barbecues and fireplaces and cooking and all the stuff that I have, and that's why I have gas. The primary reason I have gas is for backup for faulty electricity. When you look at the demand side, it repeats itself over and over again no matter the building type. In blue is cooling. It's always half. The scary part is in heating. Because in heating it might be only a quarter. And that's when Harvard University introduced what they call the Falcon curve. And that means you're using more energy to heat than you were using to cool. And if the problem was the grid and the problem was power, and now I'm using more energy in the winter than I was using in the summer, I become a winter peaking utility. What we do with BESS is we have our own Falcon curve, and it's shown there, because that vertical axis is money. And when you show this to an owner, he's looking at, well, here's my seasons, what's the money? And the layers that you see describe where that energy came from. Now this is a free program at a high level, and the purpose for you as an individual is to be able to put in a building, run a template, and take it to your design community, your design team, your utility, and say, look, I got this software and it says this. What does it mean to me? Oh, well, let's call these guys and they'll help us put our building and our systems in this program. Or after you watch the tutorials, you go, I can do that myself, which is what we hope for. This slide has a lot of information going on. It was done by the Energy Commission to try and basically talk years and years ago about what was going on with the heat island effect in buildings. When I look at it, I see multiple other things. I see that if I do off-peak cooling and I don't live in the inner city, that it makes sense to cool against cooler air at night. It scares me because in this hall of AHRI, we look at our equipment and compare our performances against the outdoor air temperature average typical not too high, not too cold. So part of what we're working with on our BEST software is to give you an ability to say, I want to know what that system would do if it's 120 on the roof. And that big thermometer that's there, I don't know if you can read any of it, but it's an advertisement from a company that sells roofing. And on the bottom it says, in white, that you can't hardly read, on a sunny day at 90 at the airport, where the weather station's taking the temperature and reporting it, your temperature on the roof may be 120, 100, up to 140. We can't expect HRI to start having labs test equipment at those kinds of extremes. They can't do it. They can test water because water is controlled. So they test water source equipment at its extremes. Air source equipment, they test at typical, and then they report part loads. But I don't care about part load anymore. When we first started doing our software, we looked at what's the annual energy consumption. Then we started to realize demand was a lot more important. Because why? Why did we first get district systems and then all of a sudden we stopped getting them? We stopped getting them because we had reliable grid. Well, how much power do you want to use, sir? Yeah, just put your building on here. We'll bring you this. No, you can't go there. Things have changed. Demand has changed. Population's changed. Consumption's changed. So what we're talking about, how do we offset consumption? So our advantage, we know. Whether we have to use air or whether we're going to use water, the technology is changing so rapidly. The key is, and our key to you is, ask what you're getting. What refrigerant are you getting? What happens when it gets cold outside? One of my pet peeves is people that mumble. Yes, this equipment's rated down to -15°C. We've got enough Canadians in the audience that they laugh at that because -15 sounds great until you realize it's 5F. And I am here to tell you, I have heard some pretty high-level people do that to my immediate response to their website. So no, there's equipment down there that works great. How can it get applied? Maybe it can't be applied to the individual building, but it could be applied if this neighborhood becomes a campus. Maybe it can't, and the other thing, it can't be done all at once. No, it probably can't. Look at Princeton University. They have been working on their program for 7 years. It takes planning to say, how are we going to take advantage of this? An individual house brings water in at the street, and then it takes heat out of your house and warms up, and then you heat it higher. Then you flush it. I can tell you, there's been guys in the geothermal industry that think, oh, I'll just go take all the heat out of the septic tank. Don't do that. But if enough people flush their toilet, and where I live, next to the elementary school, and there is a sewer pumping station across, well, with an appropriate green belt across the street, that you can take that heat in the sewer now because it's enough to make it worthwhile to do that. Now, if you have a hotel, if you have an apartment building, if you have that kind of building already, then you can look at it yourself. Because I don't know about you, but I'm in a hotel that's got a really great rain shower, and I have to admit, I took a long shower last night. I really enjoyed it. But what did I do? I said, well, I'm paying you enough money that I can do whatever the damn flat I want. and that's part of the issue that we see. It seems even in apartments, they tend to use more water. You think about whether it's a HUD facility, or you can think all the way to prisons, where I'm shocked to hear that you're stuck in a room and the only thing that you have is water in the toilet, and you just flush it every once in a while. You know, what was that movie? You know, ring. I like that sound. I like that I can do it. Well, the advantage of water is what? It's real easy to measure how many BTUs are in it. 5-gallon bucket of water has 25,000 BTUs in it if it changes 10 degrees. The reason I'm saying how simple this is because when you go to public officials to talk about doing something, they don't take risks. But if you go to them and you talk about, we're going to use meters, and we're going to bill just based on GPM, we're not going to be an energy company, we're not a utility, we're a water services, energy services company, and we are going to recover our investment by how much GPM you use. And it's easy to measure. And you're not going to measure it based on the delta T that happens in the building, because if I get a hold of that building owner, I'm going to teach him how to net the energy in his own building before he rejects that water back to that sewer. So he's not going to be using, or back to that thermal energy network, so he's not going to use, if he was going to get a bill for delta T, like if you are on a district cooling system, there are those that bill for 18-degree delta T whether you use it or not, because that's where my chiller plant works really great, and that's what you're going to do. If we talk about thermal energy network, 0 is our delta T, 0 is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So, how do we get connected? How do we do this? As I said before, every building already has at least 2 water systems connected to it that would be suitable to become an environmental neighborhood. They have domestic water and they have sewage. And I'm going to introduce something to you called one pipe. Because one pipe can be used to advantage, but if you don't know what it is, you just go, oh, this doesn't work. How many people know what a one pipe system is? Oh. Same guys that raised their hand before. I'm going to demo it. And I'm going to have to leave this podium to do that. No, I'm not. Up in the corner, left-hand top corner, you see a building that looks like it might be an office. It might, probably not an apartment. I don't know what it is. It's a multiple-story building. And what it is, what we're going to do in this room, is each of these row of tables is a floor. So vertically, I'm going to run a pipe from where that projector is sitting to the last table. And it's going to deliver a fixed temperature of water. And then at each table, I'm going to run one pipe from that central pipe to a collection pipe or return that's against the wall on either side. Now put your hands out like this. You are now all heat pumps. And you are pulling water out of the pipe, and you're putting water back into the pipe. And depending on whether you put your hands down. Depending on whether you were heating or cooling, you either raise the temperature of that water or you lower the temperature of that water. And in 1954, when Bell and Gossett first started talking about what's called monoflow, they were looking at, well, how hot do we have to start the water before, if we bleed a little bit onto this unit, a little bit onto that unit, a little bit off that it'll be okay when we get to the end. We can do that system and say, it's not going to change more than 10 degrees from one end to the other, even if everybody's on. I call it delta T percent. Each one of you is only a percent of your effect that you can create on that pipe. And I'm going to set it up so that the difference in temperature between the one that went up the middle and the one that came down the wall is only 10 degrees. And I'm going to do that because with heat pumps, it really doesn't make a big difference with that little. And it's way inside what the temperature will change outside today. So how can somebody argue that, well, I was cooling, but I was more efficient? Well, wait a minute, you heated and I used that heat, so you owe me. No, stop, zip, don't go there. So what else can you do with that idea? What happened to my building? It's got to go backwards. Now, below the building that we just did, it says tenant, 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 tenant. So imagine that those buildings have that one pipe running through them because they know how big the buildings are and they're going to allow for what heat has to happen. And then in that parking lot, they're going to come out of the parking lot, they're going to go into what is called a ground heat exchanger. So there's these holes in the ground that transfer heat back and forth. How many people already know what I'm talking about, what a ground heat exchanger, okay. So you come out of the building and connect all the supply side. Each one goes through the ground loop, come out, you've got a new supply to the building, goes through the building, comes back. That school in the lower left, they do exactly the same thing. Into the school, down the corridor, out, into the ground loop, out of the ground loop, back, round and round and round and round. And what's happening in a lot of schools is they go hybrid. I only have enough ground loop to handle my heating load. So I can get rid of carbon, but I'm still going to need a cooling tower to handle the heating side. So there's hybrids that can be associated with that. Because of this system, I could not be the mechanical room only here, not only be the ground loop here. I could be the ground loop or a mechanical assist back there. I could make one of you, maybe one of you is a church, and you have a very sophisticated, or would like to have a very sophisticated HVAC system. But it only gets used 3 days a week or something. Maybe they become a hub for all of the neighbors, or a school, a school that's going to be abandoned becomes a hub for an environmental neighborhood because they have property and they can put in some ground loop. They can put in backup boilers. They can put in air source reversing chillers. They can either add heat or subtract heat from this ambient temperature delta T that we have to deal with. On the right-hand side, a bunch of old apartments. You go in there and fill them up with electric heat pumps that are sucking a bunch of energy in the winter, and guess what? If they pulled gas out of that area, every other building around there that was depending on gas for heating now gets shut down because they don't have enough power. Those buildings are suitable to say, let's have a thermal energy network for the whole block, or for multiple blocks, or connected to a series of blocks that are apart from it. And using that one pipe theory, I go up one set of apartments with a pipe, I go across the roof or down the floor, and I go down through another set, and I come back to the basement. And I either connect to a thermal energy network, or I connect to a modular chiller, or I connect to a little heater, or a boiler, or whatever. When I first got in this business, what did we use? Swimming pool heaters and dry coolers. I mean, I lived in Seattle, what the heck? It was easy. So, one pipe, two pipe, logic, sharing, easy to manage. Today's materials, today's piping makes it easy to conceal. When you're dealing with renovations and old buildings and where you're going to run pipe, you're going to run ductwork. Pipe is easy, flexible. Doesn't have to be square anymore. It can be round. Well, not just round pipe, but round distribution. So, building, in your own individual building, where can you move energy? Do you have a pond? Does it make sense? Are you talking about putting in a fire protection tank. Those get pretty big pretty quick. Are you talking about rainwater capture? We have a video that we were doing where the unions are talking about how they want to support thermal energy networks because of the work that it means for them. And one of the other things that's happening is that people are talking about rainwater retention. And when you get a big tank and you start flywheeling back and forth, or you flywheel off a peak and then off peak you start doing things, now you start using all different resources to the advantage of the owner of multiple buildings. Campuses like to apply thermal energy networks in districts, but it's one owner to all the buildings. We're talking about how do you move to all the owners have a say. And all the owners can go and say, look, I want that low utility bill. I want to know that my money is going to not only improve energy, and not only is it going to improve the water district, but because we're in relatively new development, for example, we're not going to put as much pressure on the grid, so we're not going to harm the people that are already here, because we're being progressive. A big movement that's happening across universities is how to get rid of steam, keep it where they need it, and then, oh, does all my equipment still work because the water's not as hot as it used to be? Well, one of the sneaky things that they'll tell you is that they're dropping the temperature to find out just how low they can get away with. And then there's just so much more equipment now. It's not that radiator that I had to stay after school and explain to my dad why I thought it was really fun to melt crayons on the radiator. And there probably isn't enough of you in here old enough to even know what I'm talking about. But it was embarrassing. Anyway, what if you just add fan coils? What if you think, why does the cooling coil always have to be bigger? Maybe the heating coil should be bigger. Maybe when it gets too cold outside, I convert that cooling coil to the heating coil. It's already got 3 rows in it. It'll work great. There's a lady in Toronto, relatively intelligent. We were talking about low temperature heating, and she says, I don't understand these guys. Why are they saying you can't heat with water that's 120? I'm not even supposed to let my water heater get higher than 120. What is going on? Of course, the counter to that is Dr. Harriet Burge explaining to me, as a microbiologist in Harvard, that she didn't understand why we were pushing to reduce the temperature of circulating hot water below 140 because bacteria likes to grow there. I'm not saying what's right. I'm saying what's locally up. It's called thermal advantage. Where's the thermal advantage? Where's our advantage to you? We will give you free software that you can load your costs in against a model. The gray one on the left is where you put the box model in and where you put in the utility cost. Now when I say this is where you put it in, years ago when we let this software out, it was that. You put the numbers in. Now we fill in all the numbers for you based on typical examples, working with 50 contractors across the United States and Canada, and then all the engineers that we work with, to try and give you typical answers, but make every input not only output, but changeable. In the middle is the consumption. At the end is the key. When you sit down with your design team, and he says, we want to evaluate geothermal against something. Our default numbers not only have the energy consumption that's being used by the ground loop, but it has the cost to put the ground loop in it as well. So when I show you ground source heat pump numbers, I'm saying, oh look, if you had a thermal energy network, if you had a way to get that water temperature to you for your building to heat and cool with, and you didn't have to pay for it, if you didn't have to pay for that infrastructure, now it's a win-win. And that's the message that we want you to deliver. That's the message we want you to take to your sphere of influence and say, look, this is owner benefit personified. This is very, very simple. It's proven. It's simple. Think about that. I'm the water district. I already manage 2 systems that have what? Open connections to people. How much water I use, how much I flush, this is nothing but water that goes around and around in a circle. And if we put it in the ditch with the sewer, 2 things happen. One, there's no worry that it's going to start an electrical problem. It's not going to mix with potable water. It has this biggest single advantage to what I'm talking about. The sewer district, because of the approvals and things that they have to do in order to put in sewer service, overlaps totally not only with where you would put a thermal energy district pipe, but every way that you would green it. Every geothermal idea that you would apply to it, every ground source idea, every heat recovery from wastewater, they are all things water. They have the approval and the ability to look at it, and me as an owner, I'm not going to go around bragging about, boy, my water service is great. Well, mine is because I have my own well. I didn't mean to say that. But they need money. They need income. This is revenue generation for them. It is an infrastructure that makes sense for mixed use, low income, medium income, my income. If the gas company in my neighborhood would have said to me, we can't put in one of these thermal energy districts, but we will put in a ground loop for you. You will lease it from us, and you will have natural gas generator backup. I would have signed up for that in a minute, because 30 years ago, even though ground loops were a lot cheaper, and I was vice president of a heat pump company at the time, and this guy right here helped me put it in. But it's, oh yeah, I burned him. I know, if anybody knows what fusion is, he was teaching me how to do fusion. He got burned, I got fused. Anyway, it's really that simple, but we have to stop talking to ourselves. We have to talk to others. We have to talk to people that are city planners. We have to explain that, listen, Mr. Mayor, or you at the Public Utility Commission, or as we've just done with Illinois' Public Bureau of Utilities, or whatever it's called, it's an unusual name, talk about the idea that if we can unite the utilities in our area with our goals and use to advantage what we have, whether it's a pond, a river, a lake, the Corps of Engineers has to get involved, whatever, whether it's done and will be done over a long period of time, it can use local resources, because if you can design a 20-story building, you can design that loop. In that local area, they've already put in a domestic water system and a sewer system. Both of those are much more difficult to design than a thermal energy network. And yet that thermal energy network gives that water district and that city to say, Mr. Owner, Miss Owner, Mrs. Owner, we're bringing you energy efficiency in the street. We stop saying we're going to take away this, take away that, you can't do this, you can't do that. Do this if you pay for it. No, give us something. And I'm optimistic about it. I'm here standing here telling you this because this is real stuff. It's easy. We just have to do it. Where we're blowing up our energy is because people don't have access to it. This gives them access to it. And it makes sense.